United States is we give $1 a gallon subsidy to biodiesel made from virgin soybean oil or oil. So, I mean, in some sense, it's competing in the market with a big subsidy itself. And to tell you the truth, in the United States, the numbers we run are such that it makes no sense whatsoever with the current subsidy structure for biodiesel and the current subsidy structure for ethanol to have any biodiesel plant operate. The margins are negative. And why that is that the world vegetable oil demand is growing so strong that the market is just outcompeting the biodiesel market for vegetable oil. So I hate to say it's the market solution because it's not, because the government is subsidizing biodiesel and it's subsidizing ethanol, but subject to the government subsidies, soybeans is being outcompeted by corn. Now, you could argue about the level of subsidies, but I'm not here to tell Congress what level of subsidies to run. I'll just say, well, given that you tell us what the subsidy levels are, we'll tell you the consequences of that.
On the question of monoculture, which is not a Brazilian problem, it's everywhere. If you go to the Midwest of the United States, you see lots of corn monoculture, and it's everywhere in the world. So this question of exploring economies of scale in good regions for traditional commodities, it happens in all rich countries, in all countries that have resources to produce commodities in a very competitive way, developing countries and developed countries. And the Brazilian model of agriculture is not very different of the US model in terms of the technology that we applied. Most of the PhDs we have in the agricultural schools in Brazil, they came to the United States and they learned much of what we did here. It's a worldwide question. But if you look at the Brazilian case, so are we going to more monoculture or less? If you look at Brazil in the past, we used to have 100% coffee country or 100% sugarcane country in some times. So we had a big monoculture in the past. Even in the 70s, our exports used to be 70% of Brazilian exports were coffee, which gave a big rent to São Paulo state. And then we had diversifications. So we have diversification from areas where we have no conditions to produce, like the center-west of Brazil. That was nothing there in the 70s. And then because of the technology developed by Embrapa and other universities, we were able to do soybeans and pastures there. And today, if you go to the center-west, you see soy became corn and became cotton, which are expanding very much. And the pastures became not only beef, but also dairy and pork and poultry. So what kind of monoculture you have there? What you have is a more globalized system with a very strong integration between livestock and agriculture, where the productivity of land and the use of technology is raising extremely rapidly. If you look at the total productivity factor of agriculture in Brazil, it raised incredibly in the last 20 years. So I don't think, if you go to probably to Ribeirão Preto in the state of São Paulo, you see lots of sugarcane. But when you look the whole country, you look the forest and not this specific area, you have 7 million or 14 million acres of sugarcane in a country that have 150 million acres of cultivated land, 440 million acres of pastures, another 200 million acres of available land. So it's really very, very small when we look at the whole country. And only 36% of the land in Brazil is used for agriculture, which is very small, and Brazil is still one of the countries that have more forests in the world.
Yeah. Raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. David.
David Adams. I cover Latin America for the St. Petersburg Times in Florida, and as a result of that, I actually now edit a blog on alternative energy called The Fueling Station after visiting Brazil. The reason why Brazil was so successful is because you had a great feedstock, but you also at the same time developed a great technology in using that feedstock as a transportation fuel. In the United States, we hear a lot at the moment about ethanol and cellulosic ethanol and biofuels. What about the other side of the equation? And we seem to hear a lot less about how we're going to put that in cars and how that is going to happen in an integrated way. And there are obviously worries that supply and demand are going to get out of whack unless something happens in the automotive industry, and also in the rising costs of constructing ethanol plants in Tampa, where our paper is. There's a company trying to build an ethanol plant, and they're coming up against all kinds of obstacles, from environmental concerns, water usage issues, and even clean air.
Yeah, and I would invite also Greg to comment on that. I'd like to know if in the interagency consultations, if those things are coming up. But I think the question was directed to...
I was going to say something about interagency cooperation, because that's going to be key from DOE, EPA, USDA, and I guess State Department, I didn't know that, to get E10 in the penetration better. So I'd just soon have you answer that.
Sure. Okay, a couple of issues that you raised. The first of which is that the technology, so to speak, to create ethanol has been around for over 150 years. It's not a technology. It's a process. It's a process that is equivalent to what was been used for more than a century to create spirits. And one of the reasons that Brazil has been so strong at this is not only because of their land mass, it's because they've been doing it for a long time. It's worth noting that we're not dealing with technology when we're really talking about biofuels today. The second is when you're talking about the value chain, which is really what you're getting at, which is sort of the everything from the feedstock to the processing of ethanol. Today it's done in low-tech ways. Tomorrow it will be done in very high-tech ways. The logistics of distribution, transportation, storage, and then the end-use issues, be it for transportation or for power generation, et cetera, all of which are being looked at, all of which are being invested in, all of which are going to be making some very important development leaps in the near future. On the automotive side, and I heard this said a little bit earlier, it is worth noting that the incremental cost for a car manufacturer today to make a car flex fuel is somewhere between $35 and $105. It's a cost-neutral decision for them. It is why you're hearing from some of the automotive manufacturers that they are looking to, have some high percentage of their vehicles be flex fuel in the future. Now, it takes a little bit of time for them to organize themselves and create, the necessary changes in their factories, et cetera. But the actual cost, whether it's passed through to the consumer or whether they are going to eat it, is very small, and very small as a percentage of the sale price of their automobile. So it's already moving in this direction very quickly. And I'm not sure exactly what your other questions were, but I don't know if you want to elaborate.
That's the principal one. I mean, there's also the issue of ethanol plants that get very, very expensive. We've had one or two projects in Florida already scrapped, and the state has no ethanol plant. And another one that was about to ground.
Okay. Well, I think I heard most of what your question was about. Again, the economics are changing all the time. You look at the cost curve for ethanol production in this country, and yes, corn is not nearly as strong a feedstock as is sugarcane, and we all recognize that. The importance of cellulosic will change that considerably. The ability not only, if you actually, this is why it takes time, you need to work through all the numbers, but it's not just about the feedstock, it's about how you harvest the material. So when you're doing large-scale agricultural production, the United States has led in the innovations necessary to harvest at large scale. These are the kinds of things that we're going to probably be seeing quite near in our future. And the prospects for the United States, whether it be corn, and it already has begun a little bit in pilot stages in Florida and in Louisiana, looking at sugarcane. And the third option being energy crops themselves. This is where the miscanthus, switchgrass, all the things you've been hearing about that are energy crops that have been designed and engineered to become the energy sources of the future. This is where things are heading. So you have throughout the value chain enormous amount of innovation. So I would just caution folks, when we're talking about the biofuel space, it's a lot of different pieces coming together. So infrastructure right now, if you want to go to E10, you don't need to make infrastructure changes. The automotive, you don't even need flex fuel vehicles. All you need is to put that into your automobile. If you want to move it through the pipelines, similarly, E10 works today. When you're getting to more extensive consumption, certainly there'll be infrastructure changes, but there are also a lot of things going on the biofuel side, butanol, et cetera, that are looking to be transportation neutral, if you will, such that you don't have some of these concerns. So there's a lot of work being done, and I think it's extremely exciting to see how quickly this is all moving in the right direction.
Let's do Patricia, and then Barbara, and then Annette. Let's do 3, and then we do 3 more.
I have 2 questions for Mr. Manuel. I'm Patricia, I'm the Washington correspondent for Brazilian newspaper Estado de São Paulo. My first question is, you mentioned that there's no tariff reduction on the table. So I was wondering if there could be, in the long term, anything about an extension of the Caribbean Basin Initiative or the duty-free quotas or something in that direction. And my second question would be, in terms of national security and foreign policy, what is the importance of a global ethanol market for the U.S.?
Sure. Let me take those.
Go ahead.
Let me take those 2 questions in reverse order. Geopolitically, biofuels represents an enormous opportunity. I went through earlier a bit the benefits, the economic, the social, the environmental benefits, the counter-narcotic benefits that are very compelling. Just looking at the Western sort of hemisphere region, the Latin American, Caribbean region specifically, they spend, the aggregate countries there spend roughly 7.2% of their GDPs importing oil. The United States, by contrast, spends about 2.5%. That is an enormous difference. In some countries, the vulnerability is such that they spend, the Dominican Republic at the oil highs was spending nearly 20% of their GDP, for example, importing oil. Those are not sustainable numbers. That currency could be much better used by investing for domestic production that will yield to domestic consumption and really provide a substitute for oil that would be bought on the market for nearly twice the price. And not only the economics makes a lot of sense, but all the social, environmental, and other benefits that we talked about a little bit earlier, which actually dovetails into your other question of the trade issue. The Congress has spoken on this. They've extended the tariff to 2009. It is our law. It is the law that we will abide by. But interestingly, in our conversations with different countries around the world and investors, large investors, and a lot of the largest companies, they see access to the U.S. market largely being an option value. This is something that at some point will be very, very good to have, but not necessary. And you can just look at the numbers today. I mean, the activity going on in biofuels investment, not only in the U.S. but abroad, suggests that clearly there's economic opportunity out there without it. For the same reason that Brazil exports a very small amount of biofuels, because they've seen it to be in their benefit to substitute out oil imports and replace it through domestic production of an oil substitute. These countries in the region and abroad, a lot of them who have the climactic conditions to be economically viable producers of biofuels, can benefit enormously by moving in this direction. So it's the geopolitics is really a question of diversifying the source of energy, not only for the United States, but for all of our friends and allies abroad who are looking at the same concerns of energy security, who are looking to wean themselves away from the single supplier agreements, or at least concentrated supplier agreements, and the politics of petrodiplomacy, which don't always fall in their favor.
Emerson, you wanted to say to add something?
Yes, I would like to add a comment on the tariff issue. The fact that the tariff is not on the table right now doesn't mean that the tariff is not an issue for Brazil. That was made clear throughout the last year when our former ambassador, Roberto Abelur, engaged conversations with administration officials here in Washington, and also with governor of California, the governor of Florida, who are very interested in the ethanol agenda, and we would like to see the tariff removed in the long term, in the future, either through bilateral talks or negotiations at Geneva. But the fact is that the tariff itself is the situation here in the U.S. has changed, and the fact that the tariff was extended only 2009 instead of 2011, which was the initial move from Senator Grassley, is an indication that there are some discussions here in the U.S. regarding the importance of the tariff to the U.S. market. We've seen the cattle raisers in the U.S. calling for the removal of the tariff, worried about the costs of corn in the production chain. So all this is part of the discussions regarding the cooperation in the ethanol, and we would like to see the tariff, of course, removed in due time. Thank you.
Well, Barbara? Marcos wanted to say something.
No, let me just compliment, because there's lots of discussions in Brazil about the tariff. It's an obsession about the tariff sometimes. But I think that this is a long-term issue of cooperation. It's a revolution. What Bruce showed now it's not only an issue related to the ethanol tariff in the U.S., but it's an issue that will affect corn prices, soy prices, chicken, poultry. So it's a major issue. We're talking about a big revolution that's happening because of some players moving very fast in this area, especially the U.S. But Europe can also go in the same direction. If they go to 5.75 substitution, they will also move very fast. So I think they move a little slowly. It's probably slower than the U.S., but they will move fast, and it has impacts on the vegetable oil markets, strong impacts, because you had a boom on vegetable oils in the last years because of China consumption. Well, what happened in Brazil or Argentina in the last years? It was related to the consumption of soy oil in Asia, and now if soy oil is diverted to produce biodiesel, it has major impact. So I think that countries need to cooperate very much to understand the long-term issues. And one of the topics is market access. I agree with you. This needs to be on the agenda. And it's not only tariff. We can, for example, study the possibility to replace tariff by a quota, where you have more control of imports. You can study the possibility that was raised by Professor Tyner of having a variable tariff that will change. It's not on a specific fixed tariff, but a variable tariff that will change over time depending on oil prices and other things. So there are many things that can be studied here, but not to be implemented this year, but to be implemented during the next 10 years in a long-term prospect and well done studies with good scenarios, etc.
Barbara Bramble.
Thank you very much. I'm Barbara Bramble with the National Wildlife Federation. This question is for Greg and Emerson. It deals with standards and codes, but maybe a different kind. I'm kind of thinking about greenhouse gases emissions and maybe environmental standards. To be a green fuel, which a lot of us talk about, you really have to look at not just the efficiencies and the greenhouse gas efficiencies in particular of putting the feedstocks together, processing, transportation, although all of those could be improved, I'm sure. But also you need to make sure that the existing vegetation that's on this land where you're going to be growing these biofuels is not cut and burned to clear areas to turn them into croplands, as, for example, the prairies in the U.S. or the palm oil plantations in Indonesia. And this is definitely not a question that's aimed at Brazil, because you had that wonderful map, Marcos, where you showed where the sugar is mostly being grown now, and I totally understand that. But in other places, it's quite important. Indonesia is now the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and it's because of deforestation, and most of that is for palm oil. So to pretend this whole thing is for renewable energy, which reduces greenhouse gases, is quite absurd. So my question is, would environmental or sustainability or greenhouse gas type standards possibly be part of the partnership and cooperation that Brazil and the U.S. are talking about? Thanks very much.
Barbara, unexpected questions. I think the way to answer this question is, first of all, splitting biofuels into ethanol and biodiesel. On the ethanol side of things, and something that Marcus alluded to earlier in his map, it's just worth understanding in 10 seconds or less how sugarcane works. The plant is stressed for several months a year, 4 to 6 months or so, at which point it creates the sugar. And if it's not stressed, meaning if it doesn't get cold and doesn't get dry, which is what triggers the stress, there is no sugar in sugarcane, or a lot less. And the decision to not have ethanol production in the rainforest is an economic one, meaning that it is not, they're not holding the gates and preventing people from going to the rainforest. It's a question of economics. The yield rates in very wet environments are less than half of what they are in this incredible climate that Brazil has, as well as a number of other countries. That's the first. On biodiesel, you're absolutely right. It's something that needs to be managed carefully. A lot of the biofuels feedstock, palm oil, for instance, it works perfectly in areas that are currently, used by the rainforest. So there's a real need to focus on that. To your particular question, absolutely. The sustainability issues, environmental concerns, are all going to be part of the type of work that you will be hearing about through this initiative.
Let me just complement this question, which is I've just came from a visit to Malaysia and Indonesia, and I saw exactly the questions you raised. We have a very small palm oil operation in Pará, in Brazil. We don't think that it will expand very much, but palm oil has these characteristics. It's very in the equatorial region and have impacts on forests. But what I saw especially in Malaysia is a worry about that, and what I think it's a very good way to move is through this dialogue between the agents from the chain. The round table on sustainable palm that was developed I think 3 or 4 years ago, it's a very good way to move in terms of principles and criteria and the certification system enforced by the private sector. I really do not believe, knowing the Brazilian situation, where we have 50% of the land in the Amazon which have no defined property rights. I don't believe that governments can do very much. What I believe is that the private sector can, through enforcement mechanisms like what was done for palm oil in Asia and what we are now starting to do for soy in the Amazon, this is the best way to move.
Yes, Emerson, you want to say something?
Yes, just a brief comment. Well, certainly the environmental dimension is one of the concerns we have when discussing policies in Brazil, not only internal policies, but our foreign policy with regard to cooperation with other countries. The fact is that this Chief of Staff coordination agency that was created last year, this body brings together not only the Agriculture Ministry, the Energy Ministry, and the Foreign Affairs Ministry, but also the Environment Ministry and other agencies involved with the issue, the Transportation Department and Labor Department. So all these dimensions are have been taken in consideration when discussing these policies for the development of the biofuels industry in Brazil.
Yes, Annette.
Hi, Mark Nicholson.
No, it's Annette Hester. Okay, go ahead.
This relates both to the previous question and to previous talk of the trade-offs between commodity prices, food prices, and the diversion of crops into ethanol production. As you look at next-generation cellulose-based ethanol, does that carry any particular specific land use implications based on where these grasses are likely to be planted? Are they likely to displace other crops, leading to impacts on food prices in other ways? Are they most likely to come about in virgin lands, raising the questions of our previous questioner about green gas emission from clearance of tropical forest or whatever it is, clearance of the prairies or wherever these grasses are likely to be situated?
Okay, it's all speculation, so I got to first say that. But grass grows where? Where it rains a lot. Where does it rain a lot? Not in the prairies. The prairies, it's dry, unless it's long grass prairie. Long grass prairie is in Iowa, Illinois, southern Minnesota, Missouri, the Corn Belt. And so if you want to grow grass, you're going to grow it either where it rains a lot down in the southeast, but it gets hot, and most of that has been forested now. There's not a whole lot of crop ground. There used to be a lot more crop ground in the southeast. It now has been reverted to forest land, or urbanization, but primarily forest land. And so you got to think about, the answer to your question is yes, it's going to compete. It's going to compete against feed grains. It's going to, and oil seeds. And so you have to think about, how is it going to compete? I don't know how it's going to compete. I don't think it will compete, to tell you the truth. I don't see over the next, unless we get tremendous growth in corn yields and soybean yields, I don't see how, so that we can get by on fewer acres, basically. I don't see how any kind of dedicated cellulosic switchgrass or something is going to compete with feed grains in the United States. They take the same kind of resources to grow well. Now, so that doesn't mean that we're not going to learn how to create cellulosic ethanol. I think the first feedstock in the United States is going to be byproducts of crops, and I'm thinking corn stover primarily, and a big plant, Broyne, announced in prime Corn Belt country that they're going to start supplementing their corn or grain-based ethanol with corn stover. So it's all speculation, but I just look at where grass grows. It grows where corn grows.
Yes, Annette. Oh, you want to say something on this?
Sure.
Sorry.
Again, when you're looking at the efforts made on the feedstock side of things, they're looking at yield improvements. They're looking at feedstock that can manage in less desirable environments, so less water, less fertile soil, and you're looking at feedstocks that can even be grown in really marginal land that's not used for in current agricultural production. So all of these things are being looked at. So I think the answer in the near term is yes, it's probably going to be in areas that we would all, as my colleague just mentioned, we would all identify to be agriculturally ripe, and it's more of a substitution opportunity. But in the near future, it is not only not unlikely, it is inevitable that there's a focus on a lot of the marginal land opportunities out there in this country and in some of the arid areas of the world, in Africa, for example, where jatropha already, without much genetic modification, transgenic work is being applied to semi-desert environments, and seeing some real positive case studies being driven there.
Annette.
Have it on? Yeah. Oh. Just a few comments. I find it really interesting, and it's been puzzling me for quite a while. The drive that we see in the U.S. is a drive for energy security, and the environmental and all of the other issues are sort of kind of operating on the side. But at the same time as you have this huge drive for energy security, you're not making a lot of difference in energy security. At the same time, some of the lessons that could be learned in environmental and so on in other areas are somewhat being sort of neglected. Some of the points that are made, clearly cellulosic ethanol has to be the answer. Being able to co-produce the corn and ethanol will reach, will get us a lot there. But at the same time, the protectionist mentality, or sort of that it's a domestic thing, is energy security, has to be done locally, also has turned the risk of not allowing this new technology to be shared. And that is where I think it really should be some thought to the sharing of the new cellulosic technology, so that it's not all happening here, and where other places are using old technology, not necessarily environmentally beneficial, but so that the United States and that protectionism sort of gives a lag, because changing the protectionism from oil to the protectionism of farmer groups is not any advantage. But as we go along, is the real, in the agenda of cooperation, is the sharing and application of the brand new state-of-the-art cellulosic technology in line with what you plan to do in the agreement with Brazil?
Okay, a couple of things there. What the focus of our efforts with Brazil are around public-private sector partnerships, and the benefits of cellulosic technology are going to be brought about by the private sector everywhere in the world where it makes sense. In fact, it would be probable that cellulosic technology in its early stages would find a home in tropical climates before it does in temperate ones, because frankly the economics would make more sense. So-called cellulosic 1.0 may find its way in a tropical environment before it makes economic sense in the United States, because the thresholds are different, and it takes time.
Not with the kind of money you're pouring into.
I'm sorry?
The economics don't play out because the United States government has pockets that others don't.
But the cellulosic pieces are not probably going to be solved by our governments. It's probably going to be solved by our private sectors. Our governments will work on parts of this, of course, and they will be part of the solution. Again, the benefits are, in terms of, even what I just discussed already, are really to look at bringing the benefits of biofuels to other countries. So it's not at all something that is locked into the United States or Brazil. A fundamental pillar of our cooperation is about bringing the benefits of biofuels to other countries.
Yes.
Thank you. Maria Vélez with Latin Intelligence Corporation. Speaking of the development or enhancement of energy crops, what is the role of Embrapa in that particular area?
Well, with regard to ethanol, basically the research and development has been done by the private sector through these 33 years of experience. But now Embrapa is kind of investing more in developing technology on the biofuels area. Last year, Embrapa has launched a dedicated center for biofuels research in Brazil. So the idea is to invest more in terms of not only genetic research, but also improving yields for ethanol production and biodiesel as well.
Just to complement that, Embrapa don't have a tradition in sugarcane. It has a big tradition in soy and other plants, and I think that where we need more investments today is on the biodiesel agricultural alternatives, which are many different plants that are considered, and there Embrapa should do something. On the ethanol side, what I learned from different people in Brazil is that we should invest more on the industrial side right now. That's where investments should be more concentrated.
I would like to group the questions now, please. The lady here, and then the gentleman there, and I think we are going to wrap up after that.
Yes. Hi, Cynthia Rush with Executive Intelligence Review. I wanted to address something that I consider to be both negative and quite suspect in this whole biofuel picture, which is the financing aspect and the list that Mr. Young put up of the foreign investors who are pouring money into Brazil and to many other countries at this point. You certainly had you had the list of George Soros, Bill Gates, a number of hedge funds, which are highly speculative in nature. And I would draw your attention to a conference that was held in London on February 1st by the Frost & Sullivan Company, where one of the speakers likened the financial interest or the interest in financial organizations investing in biofuels. He likened it to the dot-com bubble that exploded at the end of the last century. There obviously has been a huge amount of speculation generally, internationally, on the Chicago market, the corn futures. The impact on that in Mexico has been pretty devastating in terms of the price of tortillas, not to mention the way in which agriculture has been negatively affected by NAFTA and free trade. I would like you to address this because it seems to me that this is more than just entities who are involved in the betterment of humanity, because hedge funds certainly don't have a history of concern for the fate of humanity, nor does George Soros. And I consider this to be a really highly suspect aspect of the whole discussion in the context of an international financial crisis, which is extremely severe.
Okay, and let me get the one more question. Is there any more? Yeah, there one there, and that's it. No.
I'd like to ask if cellulosic ethanol is wishful thinking, or is the research in an advanced enough stage that we could look at a couple of years or 5 years or 10 years? You know, where are we in this? Is this something that's real?
Yes, sorry.
My question is to Mr. Manuel. I'm Bruno Garcês from BBC Brazil. You mentioned alternative crops being, and the partnership with Brazil as being a model for containing narcotics. Do you think of a specific country, say Colombia or Bolivia or even Afghanistan, with a huge poppy production, to be somewhere?
Nice try.
I have to.
Yeah. There are a lot of countries that could benefit from this, and I won't speculate beyond that. I just wanted to address some of the suspicions from the person talking about hedge funds and the rest. First of all, the dollars going into this space from hedge funds are small relative to the dollars that are going into this from all sorts of industry, leaders, big companies, entrepreneurs, seed capital, venture capital. So yes, it's speculation, but so is every new market. Every single one, every single market in the world has begun with speculation. Thank God, because without that, nothing would happen. People believe in something, and they move in the direction to try and capitalize on that. The difference between the dot-com world and the dot-com bubble and this is that, first of all, there is, I mean, there are so many differences, but one of them is a lot of this is not in the public markets. A lot of this is private. A lot of this is happening at much smaller scales. It's also an area which is asset intensive, which is not what's happened in the dot-com world, where literally you had a one-page business plan and you all of a sudden were worth $100 million. I was there. I had a company in that space. I can tell you it's very different. Having said that, is there a bubble? Perhaps. Is there some overzealous investors? Are there overzealous investors there who have, not necessarily the right level of understanding to the dollars that they're putting in? I'm sure there is. But all in all, you're seeing an opening up of the largest market in the world to participants who up to now haven't had a chance to be part of the solution. That's the fundamental shift. Small farmers, the ag revolution, all these are banners that you've heard being used, whether it's about the United States or about Brazil and a number of third countries. So I think it's frankly too simplistic to say, oh, hedge funds this and they speculate and these, this is it's too easy to sort of create a trajectory that hedge funds are interested and made some investments and therefore this is a bubble and we're being irresponsible. I think there will be some actors who clearly are not as responsible as they should be, but overall the metrics that support this industry shift are such that it's very compelling to all sorts of investors, from the institutionals to the seed investors and everybody in between.
Marcos.
No, let me just clarify that the $12 billion that were invested in Brazil in the last that will be invested in the next 6 years, 81% is from Brazilian companies. So it's very, very domestic. But the international companies that are coming, as you said, I think it's very welcome that you have all kinds of investors there. But just to clarify, you have probably some hedge funds, some very speculative money, but you also have very traditional agri-food companies. You have Cargill investing, you have Louis Dreyfus. They just bought 4 mills last week. They just announced that they bought 4 mills, and they had already 3 others. They also, you have also Bunge there. You have also ADM that's going to the biodiesel. So it's very traditional companies diversifying from soy and from other areas to sugarcane. And you have also companies worried about global warming, about environmental issues that want to put part of their portfolio in this area. So it's not only hedge funds, and most of the investments are national investments from our own companies.
Bruce.
Well, I just wanted to mention about the price of corn. When the buildup of last fall, when the price of corn was getting bid up dramatically, everyone was blaming hedge funds and mutual funds and people that wanted to get speculating on the price of corn. It was those darn speculators that were driving up the price of corn. Well, what drove up the price of corn was people started realizing that we've run out of corn. There is no more corn in the United States until the next crop comes in. That next crop doesn't come in until starting at earliest September. Animal feeders are going to run out of corn in August. So how do you ration a fixed supply of corn? The price of corn goes up. And so that's how come the price of corn went up. And a last comment on tortillas in Mexico. It is true that those ag products that are most directly related to corn prices, with the minimal amount of markup between raw material and final consumer price, those are the retail prices that have the largest increase. But one side benefit of high corn prices in Mexico, of course, is that it finally gives maybe the Mexican farmers that produce corn for all these years, they haven't gotten out of corn, some incentive to invest in new technology and new management practice and maybe some rationalization of the Mexican agricultural industry. It's the best rural development strategy, I think, that possibly could happen to Mexican corn farmers.
Well, I think...
Oh, yeah, cellulosic technology. It's real, it's there, they can do it, but at what price? At what cost? And that's where the action is going to be, on lowering the cost of producing ethanol or butanol or syngas from this biomass material. Right now, it's completely uneconomic. You can't make a buck doing it. But if you give me higher crude oil prices, they can. You give me technical change, they can. So it's all about lowering the cost or raising the price of crude oil.
And I just wanted to also address that question. I think it's a very important one. Suspicions from the venture capital community are that within the next 2 to 3 years, you will be seeing economically viable, but at pilot stage, not industrial scale, all right, cellulosic processes. Call it 3 to 5 years to get to industrial scale, and then a beginning of real penetration in the 5 to 7 year range. Okay, so this ain't a long time. It's in fact very short when you consider the implications.
Well, and with that, I would like to bring this to a close, but I would like first to thank very much you, to thank 4 people in particular. 3 of them are here. Kristen Smith, Alan Wright, and Sarah Fink that ran the show. Those are the interns here, and this institution could not exist without them because they make things happen. I am also very grateful to Kent Hughes, who co-sponsor, but I'm particularly grateful to Professor Tyner, to Professor Babcock, Professor Young, to Emerson, and to Gregory to have come here and share their thoughts with us. This is, as I told you at the beginning, is the start of a process of a cooperation in research that will be led by the 3 professors that you saw here today. Thank you, and if you want to see this thing all over again, go to the